Did you hear about Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry VIII? She went from being the third wheel in the royal family to the Queen, who ruled with a crown of confidence. Talk about a glow-up from a life under house arrest to a powerful leader. Born to Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth had a childhood that could make anyone feel like they were in an episode of a royal soap opera. With her half-siblings, Edward VI and Mary the Voix, ahead of her in the line for the throne, she probably thought she'd be practicing her royal wave from the sidelines. But after a series of dramatic twists and turns, including a year in house arrest for allegedly plotting against Mary, Elizabeth learned the art of caution, and maybe even a little bit about how to dodge a few royal scandals. Despite her indecisiveness and cautious nature, Elizabeth turned out to be smarter than most of her court. She may not have had the typical training in governance, but she certainly aced the final exam on leadership. With a combination of intelligence, education, and a sprinkle of confidence, she transformed from a girl with a royal family drama into a queen who knew how to call the shots. Talk about a ruler who really knew how to take the crown. Elizabeth's journey to the throne was anything but a royal walk in the park. Imagine starting your reign with a title that sounds more like a plot twist in a daytime drama. The illegitimate queen, thanks to her dad, Henry VIII, and his not-so-conventional divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Many believed Elizabeth was as legitimate as a $3 bill. So while she was trying to figure out how to wear a crown, she was also dodging the skepticism of Catholics who thought her royal pedigree was a bit flimsy. When Anne Boleyn met her unfortunate fate, Henry flipped the script and declared Elizabeth illegitimate. It's like getting a ticket to the prom only for the principal to announce, "Sorry, you can't go." Just when Elizabeth thought she might regain her status, some Protestant factions were still raising eyebrows. It must have felt like being the only one in class with a valid excuse, while everyone else thought you were just making excuses to skip out on homework. To top it off, the 16th century came with its own set of gender biases, where ruling queens were treated like the side dish at a banquet. Nice to have, but nobody really cared about your main course. With the chaotic reign of Mary then fresh in everyone's minds, the public was convinced that a woman on the throne was a recipe for disaster. A queen? What's next? A cat as prime minister? They must have thought, expecting Elizabeth to sit quietly while her male advisors called the shots. But Elizabeth was not about to let anyone treat her like a mere figurehead. She had aspirations of ruling in her own right, and she wasn't about to let anyone sideline her. Talk about a woman on a mission, with sass, intelligence, and a refusal to play second fiddle. She transformed from an illegitimate princess into a queen who meant business, proving that sometimes the best way to break the glass ceiling is to wear a crown. Marriage expectations for the virgin queen, Elizabeth. I faced immense pressure to marry and produce an heir, primarily because people thought women couldn't rule effectively. Imagine being told, you need a husband to run the country. It's like saying, you need a GPS to figure out how to use a map. The idea was that a husband would rule for her, but little did they know, Elizabeth was more of a queen bee than a queen bee's husband. Succession fears. The stakes were high. If Elizabeth died without an heir, various factions could fight for the throne, potentially leading to civil war. It's funny how people were more worried about who would sit on the throne instead of who would sit down for tea with the queen. Elizabeth was expected to marry and quickly produce an heir, but she likely thought, why rush? I can binge watch my favourite shows and rule a kingdom at the same time. Reluctance to marry Elizabeth was not keen on marriage, knowing that tying the knot meant losing her power and freedom. After all, who wants to trade in their crown for a husband who might think dinner means microwave burritos? That's not the royal lifestyle she signed up for. Thus, she earned the title Virgin Queen, which sounds more like a title for a superhero than a monarch. Financial woes. When Elizabeth ascended the throne, she found herself dealing with a weak economy and looming threats of invasion, particularly from France. The situation was so dire that it was like trying to balance a budget while juggling flaming swords. One slip-up, and it could all go up in flames. To make matters worse, she inherited a kingdom that was already in debt, which is like inheriting a house with a leaky roof and no money for repairs. Inherited debt and poor decisions. Her predecessor, Mary Ford, had sold off significant crown land to cover her debts, which was a short-term solution that turned into a long-term disaster. It's like selling your car to pay off a credit card. Sure, you might be debt-free for a month, but then you're stuck walking everywhere. Elizabeth found herself in a tricky situation where the treasury was lighter than a feather, and not in a good way. Taxation troubles. The taxation system was outdated and ineffective, hitting ordinary people hard, while the nobility paid less than they owed. It's like a group project where one person does all the work, and the others take credit while eating snacks. Elizabeth feared that raising taxes would upset the nobility, but little did they know, inflation was sneaking up on them all like a cat burglar in the night, making life tough for everyone but the wealthy. People were grumbling, "Why can't I afford bread? I thought this was England, not a no-carb diet." In summary, Elizabethan navigated a maze of marriage expectations, financial woes, and an outdated taxation system, all while trying to maintain her power and protect her kingdom. If only she could have ruled with a magic wand and a good sense of humour. The religious settlement of 1559 marked a significant turning point in the history of the Church of England. After years of tumultuous reigns under her predecessors, Elizabeth I was determined to restore stability and find a middle ground that would appease both Protestant reformers and Catholic traditionalists. It was a challenging task, akin to trying to organise a potluck dinner without anyone bringing the same dish. Everyone had their own tastes and preferences. The context of turmoil. The years leading up to Elizabeth's reign were riddled with religious strife. Henry VIII had sparked the English Reformation by breaking away from the Catholic Church, and his children, Edward VI and Mary Thust, continued to oscillate between Protestantism and Catholicism. It was like a religious game of musical chairs, but with much higher stakes. Elizabeth, stepping into this chaotic arena, had to devise a plan that would bring some semblance of order to the religious landscape of England. The Act of Supremacy. One of Elizabeth's first major actions was the passing of the Act of Supremacy in 1559. This act granted her control over the Church of England, designating her as the supreme governor. Now, while being the supreme head might sound cool, Elizabeth cleverly opted for a title that avoided the gender implications of leadership. After all, who wants to deal with the arguments of a woman can't lead the church when you can just say, "I'm just overseeing things"? It's like being the manager of a pizza place without having to make the pizzas yourself. Let the staff do the heavy lifting. The oath of supremacy. To solidify her authority, Elizabeth required churchmen and public officials to swear an oath of supremacy, recognizing her as the supreme governor. Most parish priests were on board, but the Catholic bishops, not so much. They were like the stubborn relatives who refused to acknowledge the new family rules. All but one of the bishops refused to take the oath, resulting in a musical chairs situation where Protestant bishops took their places. It was a bit like a church version of Survivor, only the loyal players got to stay. The Act of Uniformity. The Act of Uniformity, also passed in 1559, imposed moderate Protestant reforms while allowing for some concessions to Catholics. This act was Elizabeth's way of saying, "Let's meet in the middle." It mandated that all churches use a new Book of Common Prayer, which was designed to be vague enough that both sides could find something to like. It's like ordering a sandwich that has everything on it. There's bound to be something in there for everyone. Reforms and concessions. The reforms included mandatory attendance at church services, with fines for those who dared miss out. Imagine being fined for sleeping in on Sunday. That's some serious motivation to set your alarm. However, in an effort to placate Catholic sentiments, churches were allowed to retain some decorations, and priests could don certain Catholic vestments. Elizabeth understood that a little compromise goes a long way. Kind of like adding cheese to a salad, it makes everything more palatable. The wording of the communion service. The wording of the communion service was another contentious issue. The new Book of Common Prayer was crafted to be deliberately ambiguous, allowing both Protestants and Catholics to interpret it in a way that suited their beliefs. It's like trying to agree on a movie to watch. Everyone has their favorite genre. How about a romantic comedy? No way, I'm in the mood for a thriller. Well, this book was designed to keep everyone guessing. The Royal Injunctions. To ensure compliance with her religious settlement, Elizabeth issued the Royal Injunctions. She made it clear that she expected everyone to conform to her acts and regularly commissioned visits to churches across England. It was like sending out surprise inspectors to check that everyone was following the rules. Surprise! It's church inspection day. One can only imagine the nervousness in the pews that day. A balancing act. In conclusion, Elizabeth's religious settlement of 1559 was a masterclass in political maneuvering and compromise. She managed to find a middle ground in a divided country, offering a settlement that acknowledged both Protestant reforms and Catholic traditions. It was a delicate, like walking a tightrope while juggling flaming torches. One misstep could lead to disaster. Yet, through her clever strategies, Elizabeth was able to establish a more stable Church of England, proving that sometimes the key to peace is knowing when to bend the rules, or at least keep them.